Imagine transforming a struggling startup into a global sensation with over 100 million users. Today, we uncover the story of how users' psychology became the secret weapon behind this explosive growth. Our guest faced daily panic and existential crisis with downloads plummeting and a shrinking team. But a spark of curiosity led to a breakthrough by tapping into a user psychology. They unlocked a growth channel that brought in over 6 million users for free. This strategy didn't just stop there, it propelled two apps to over 80 million users and increased revenue by 100 times. Discover how these insights revived a nearly dead app, pushing it into the top 10 ranking and boosting revenue by 20 times. Join us for a journey that could redefine your approach to growth and marketing. Hello, Colin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. Thank you for having me here.
Great stuff, great stuff. Colin, since from our intro call, I've been looking forward to speak with you because you have an amazing story to share. Being a founder, being somebody who have been helping other founders also, and your story is amazing. But before we jump into that, do you have a favorite quote, something that motivates you, inspires you, you would like to share with our audience?
Absolutely. So this one I have to return to a lot. It really helps drive me forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think so many of us as entrepreneurs, as people who care about our craft, who care about what we're working on, want to have that impact. We tend to be perfectionists. And I have to remind myself that putting something out there, seeing it imperfect, but still making an impact, and then getting that real world feedback and creating that virtuous loop of feedback is so important. So I remind myself this. I use the quote with my team a lot. It's something that I love to reference so that I can keep driving forward and keep putting the imperfect but done and worthy of being used product or idea out there.
Definitely, definitely. I think when I did my YC, I learned this thing is like the faster you go to the market, the better you understand
Yes.
what could be improved early in the whole cycle of your product development, right? So yeah, couldn't agree more with it. It's an amazing learning. So Colin, you have blown up a startup from scratch to 100 million users, right? I'm really interested to learn more about that story, and I want to understand more about like how did you started? What was the initial part of that story? What was the trigger? And then how did you took it from, let's say, 0 to 100 million? And I'm sure our listeners will love to hear that story.
Yeah, that's a good question because do you ever have this one moment in your life that changes your entire trajectory? So my entire life changed because one bad date I had back in 2011. When
Mm-hmm.
I went on this bad date, basically I was using some dating site, I think Plenty of Fish or OkCupid, and you fill out all these long questions. It wants to know everything about you. It feels like it's asking for your social security number, your fingerprints, etc. And after you do hundreds of questions and you send thousands, what feels like thousands of messages to women out there, and then some of them reply to you, and eventually you get one date and you're excited about it and you show up and then she doesn't show up for half an hour and you're like, oh man, I'm getting stood up.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So when I was sitting there for at the bar for half an hour and I'm looking around, and it was actually like I had a dumb phone at the time, so I couldn't really use a proper website on it. And I was trying to get to the website's messaging, but I couldn't get a hold of her. Eventually, about 45 minutes in, this giant wall of a man walks over to my table and says, "Are you Colin?" And I was like,
Mhm.
"No, I thought it was him. I thought I was like completely catfished." And then so he's like, he could tell that I was like freaking out, and he's like, "No, no, no,
Mm.
don't worry. I'm not your date, but my friend is your date, and she's been here for a while. She just felt too shy to come say hi. She thought you were too
Mm.
cute, so she didn't want to come say hi. She was scared." I was like, "Dude, I've been waiting here for like 40 minutes."
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that was not a good start to the date, but I
Mm.
I obliged. I went over with him and it ended up, being three of us in the date.
Mm,
He stuck around and it turned out that actually I was hitting it off more with him as a friend than I was with her as a date.
mm,
So him and I were chatting a while and he gets to telling this wild story from his previous birthday about a threesome.
mm,
So his girlfriend at the time
mm,
surprised him at the door with an extra friend and said, "Hey, surprise, honey, I brought you a threesome." I know you're
mm.
shaking your head like, "Oh, it's kind of like most men's fantasies," but as I was very enraptured by the story and I'm following along intently. He basically goes through a lot of the details, but skipping through them, he's having a great time, but it's going on for 2 to 3 hours. And he's wondering, how are these women going so long? They're so energetic. And he
Mm,
goes out to the living room during one of the breaks and notices a big pile of cocaine on the table.
mm.
And
The
so now
fuel.
he understands the fuel. Now he understands, and they keep going. And a bit later, one of the women, unfortunately, leans too far forward on him and breaks his dick. Yeah. Yeah,
My
there
God.
it is. The sympathy pains. I felt the very same thing in the bar. I'm hearing this and I'm like, "Oh no."
Uh,
And it's at this time, my very quiet date, who didn't exactly look like her photos, leans over, looks me right in the eye, puts her arms on me and says, "Colin, I want to break your dick."
my God. I would
All
have
right.
ran away from there.
That's what my instinct was. I was like, this was the craziest date. I mean, it starts with being stood up. Turns out that she was in there just making me wait. And then she didn't really look much like her photos. I answered all these hundreds of questions and sent all these messages just to get to this bad experience. There's got to be a better way, right?
Yeah.
So that was the bad date. One of many, of course, that set me on a whole new trajectory in my career. And I determined I can do this better. There's got to be a better way to do this. I started my first dating app startup. When that went, then I eventually pivoted during a very honest, very reflective night
Mm,
of admitting to myself and to my coworkers in the accelerator that I was going to fail. And the resulting pivot that rose from those ashes was what became Bang with Friends. And Bang with Friends was a hookup app on the Facebook Canvas era of Facebook
mm.
apps. And very quickly we rose to notoriety. We got 1 million users in about 3 months and things took off from there. But yeah, and I'll pause and give you a chance to interject here.
So I'm guessing the bad date triggered a fundamental question in your head, like, okay, this couldn't be like the only way to go on date. There has to be a better way. Has to.
Yeah.
I mean, they've taken so much data from you already. They must have taken the similar or at least 50% of that kind of data from the other side of the table,
Mhm.
right? And still you are experiencing, I guess, one of the worst dates you have been in your life, right? And that triggered that curiosity inside you. What did you do afterwards? Like when you went back from this date, what exactly was the motivation you got to start a dating app or a hookup app on Facebook Canvas?
Yeah. I remember feeling a very strong sense of frustration and just exasperation for this problem I had. I was always curious about sociology and psychology and how we as humans make friends, meet our partners, win people over, all that stuff. And so I considered myself an amateur student of that, and I was seeing it in real life just go completely wrong and go have so much wasted effort. And I realized that part of the reason I was so exasperated was one, even though I answered all these questions, there did seem to be an element of basically you couldn't be completely honest and transparent with who you were because when you were, then you had less chance of matching with those people.
Mm,
The site actively discouraged you from, let's say you were looking for somebody who is sexually compatible with you. Well, you put that on your profile on most apps and websites, and you're going to either get kicked off or you're going to be relegated to the smallest subset of users. and
Mm,
rejected by so many more. So you feel like you're playing this numbers game. And I don't
mm,
think that's a healthy way. And the second thing is I just felt at the time that there must be a better way to meet people. And I looked at all the different methods. And what I came up with was if you know a mutual friend, if you know somebody in common, then that
mm.
was an excellent way to know, okay, I probably get along with parts of their personality. They're probably safer. They're probably somebody I can ask and vet more about them. So that was the inspiration, but it came from this deep seated feeling of frustration and exasperation of I'm tired of wasting my time on this and I'm tired of not being able to truly express myself and find what I'm looking for.
Interesting. So, what was the first step like? Because I'm thinking, yes, you got a reason because you have faced the pain in your own life.
Hmm.
Perfect. I think there's a saying also, right? Eat your own dog's food or something like that
Yeah,
when you come into the founder space.
right.
And then you thought, okay, let me start it. When you went into the market, there must have been hundreds of other dating apps, right?
Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
what what did you do differently, or what was your approach to go into the market? Did you had millions of pounds or dollars to spend on the marketing, or what was your approach to get the word out for your app?
Yeah. So granted, this was so long ago, and I didn't know many of the lessons that I've learned now, which is infusing user psychology and an understanding how people really think to try to stand out. It's part of, my growth framework now is called outrageous startup growth. And that
Mm,
outrageous part really helps you to stand out. But the first version, I just went about it, the best way I knew, which was I'm gonna start small and run local events. And I'm going to try to talk to lots of friends and do lots of user interviews and get all that feedback, all the stuff that, the lean startup methodology and others teach us.
mm,
And, that stuff does get you on a path and it does help you. But I realize now in hindsight that you need more to that. And so part of how I started to learn this was after a year and a half of struggling to get my dating startup noticed, to get users, to get people excited about it and to stick around. I did have this really tough moment where I was in the middle of a startup accelerator in Silicon Valley. Halfway through it, I was a solo founder, and it was a Friday night, and we were sitting in the office, about three or four of us, and we're having some drinks. So I think a little bit more of the filters fell off, and I just said, "Hey guys, I know demo day's coming up. We got to raise from investors. You went through this
mm.
as well at YC, right? Had
Yep.
demo day pressure and preparing for it, right? And I told them demo day is coming up, but I don't think I'm going to succeed, guys. I don't think I'm going to be able to get users. I don't think I'm going to be able to sell these investors. I just feel like I'm going to fail. And that moment of clarity and honesty, expressing and voicing my true doubts really led to a breakthrough in a way that I encourage others and I remind myself to return to that vulnerability more because when we speak aloud those doubts, not that they're always true, right? We all have anxiety, but when we speak them aloud, we start to process them and start to gain perspective and to really open up our brains to other pathways. So that led to a conversation of, instead of meeting friends of friends, wouldn't it be hilarious? Wouldn't it be very curious and tap in on that part of our brains that really wants to learn which of our Facebook friends wants to hook up with us. And
Mm,
that's what the pivot was because at the time, this was still the Facebook era when lots of people were on Facebook. I was of the Facebook generation of, I graduated college in 2007. So I had like 2000 people on my Facebook network
yeah.
that I wanted to find out some of which, are they interested in me? And so we came up with this twist of, hey, let's make a side project. This is fun. We call it Bang with Friends. We code
Mm,
it in one night of Red Bulls and vodkas and send it out to our friends. And that's what helped us stand out is one, just leaning into that vulnerability and tapping into, how do we navigate around these doubts? Two, creating something that's outrageous and stands out. It's a contrast effect with what else is out there. It seemed like everybody else was afraid to acknowledge that sexual attraction is part of dating and that casual dating is a valid reason and valid interest for a lot of people.
mm.
And lastly, that there was this kind of hidden market at the time of friends that you secretly wanted to hook up with. And if they wanted to secretly hook up with you, then we could unlock that value. But if they didn't know, if it wasn't reciprocated, then it stays a secret. And so that's what launched it. That's what took off, and that provocation and all that stuff really led to a lot of massive growth. But I would say we found out pretty quickly that that's such a limited market. So we expanded it. We renamed to Down, which is right here, and
Mm,
now it's a general casual dating app for whatever you're looking for, whatever feels right for you.
that's awesome. That's awesome. You said that you had 2,000 friends on Facebook, right? So you coded it overnight, let's say a week, and then you sent it to all of them. What was the viral uh, element in that app? Because let's say you have sent it to 2,000 friends. Let's say 10% of them responded back, "Oh, that looks good. Yes, let's
hmm
accept it." But was there any element which was pushing them to spread it with their friends also, or how did you got that virality?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the honest truth is that we didn't build in much of that viral funnel into the product, into the product until a bit later. What really worked well was one, the concept and the name was just so over the top that propelled us. That is part of it. Not every startup needs that. Not every company needs something that is that provocative, but you still want to contrast and stand out from your
Mm,
competitors in some ways. And so you can dial that up from most founders, we're scared of being judged, and
mm,
so we're afraid of going out there with something that's a bit different that really stands out. So you can find ways of doing that. Don't dial it to 11 like I did every time, but do it to 8 or 9. Make sure that everything is standing out. The other
mm,
elements that we built into the product is when you use the Facebook app, you could invite friends directly from that. And so we built in that basic functionality of, hey, invite a friend to this Facebook game or app, which every Facebook Canvas app had at the time. So it was
mm,
nothing brilliant, nothing especially amazing there. We pretty quickly found out that one other element that we kind of accidentally stumbled upon worked to our advantage. And that is because I created it with two other guys in the startup, and they especially were worried about people finding out that they were part of it because they had other companies and they thought it would, such a scandalous thing would completely wipe out their chances of raising money and being successful with those startups. So we were anonymous founders. And so when we sent it to our friends, when we sent it to the press, we sent it anonymously. We did not say, hey, I'm Colin and I created this. We said, oh my God, look at this thing I found. That helped propel it because that creates this mystery, this
mm.
element of curiosity and this mystique about it that the press ran with, that everybody who talked about it ran with. Like, I don't know who created this thing, but everybody's talking about it. So
Mm.
that was, kind of an unintentional surprise. And it was a nice win that we found later
How
on.
did
Oh yeah, go
the
ahead.
press? Sorry, I wanted to ask, how did the press picked up on it? Because usually what happens is
Mhm.
founders, especially in founders world, they are trying desperately that the press picks their story or
Yeah.
they reach out to the PR agencies. But in your case, it was other way as other.
Yeah, we did reach out to a few different press channels, but one of the smaller blog sites at the time is they went with it. They wrote a very short, I think a paragraph about it. And we reached out anonymously, like I said, we just gave them the pitch, a link to the site, and they took a look at it and it was thankfully enough for them to write about it. But one I would recommend to most founders, that the press game has changed entirely in this time. So when I'm looking at launching something, I don't go to press first. I don't try to win that press because even if you do, I found it doesn't really drive the same impact as it did back in 2013 when I launched that. That's the
Mm,
first thing. The second thing is if you are going to play the press game, you really got to understand the psychology of the journalists and the editors there, what they're looking for, what's a good storyline, what's a good hook, who is their audience, all that stuff. Like what's going to make them look good in terms of their career, their bosses. And part of it is, can they be first on an exciting story or finding something at the time on the internet for that blog that would excite their audiences and drive a lot of clicks. And that's what we
mm,
did. But, you know, then after we started to hit that, I started to tap into that mindset of not only their mentality, But what is the mainstream press mentality? What do they want? If I want to get on TV, what do they want? And I built a 6-month press plan to try to keep the stories coming. So when we had a new feature release, I really worked hard on how do I craft this story? Not, hey, Bang with Friends or Down announces this new feature, but why it's important for their users, what it unlocks for them. So it was, we were pretty early in doing things like sharing some user statistics, things like, sorry, excuse me, women more than men select that they wanted to get down with somebody, meaning they wanted something casual, then they wanted to date on our app. And that
Mm,
was one of those surprising statistics that people would perk up about. Journalists would be like, whoa, 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 okay, what's going on here? So
mm,
it's understanding, how to get their attention, all that stuff. And you build this over time. But again, I would caution people that, press is definitely not a silver bullet that it was back then. And there are lots of strategies such as go local first, try to, those are easier to win and they like the local stories more, all that stuff.
yeah, yeah. I remember I spoke with a gentleman from um, Ashley Madison um,
Hmm.
on the show. If I remember correctly, what was his name? I think I totally forgot his name, but he mentioned to me that Paul Keeble. Yes, that's the name. One of the founders. He mentioned to me that I think in US the total population is almost around 340 million or something close to that, maybe under 400
Hmm.
million, right?
Yeah.
And it is surprising that almost 20,000 people register on Ashley Madison every single day. A lot of them are bots. He agrees to that, but that is even surprising because even if you multiply that number or half it and multiply it, the population number will be reached quite soon, right? In a year or
Hmm.
2 year, I don't know. But what was surprising for me was he was saying that according to their data, the data points they collect and the data points they have from the third party providers, more than 2/3 of the people who register are already married. And obviously, Ashley Madison is that kind of platform, right? And that was like mind blowing for me because it's I couldn't like articulate it properly, like what's happening in terms of number, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So I can't speak to their numbers. I do know that they had this data leak or hack actually that
yeah.
exposed that vast majority of their female accounts were bots. I know one thing that I'm very proud of is we have never allowed bots nor deployed bots on ours. Ours are all real profiles, and we're one of the first apps to actually photo verify every profile. So not only is it like a liveness test to make sure that you're a real person, but we also make sure that you look somewhat like your profile photo. So we have
Mm,
human judgment to say, okay, this is clearly not the same person. Catfish, get out of here,
mm,
or bot, get out of here, scammer, whatever. So we police this very carefully.
mm,
The reason for that is because we're all about bringing honesty to dating and transparency. So we're trying very hard. It's hard because there are bad actors who are trying to get one up on you, but we are always trying to do that. It is wild though. I can speak to the greater industry trends here of
mm.
users on dating apps tend to download us multiple times to take
Oh,
breaks. And when they do, they'll delete the app and come back and download it again, right? Sometimes they do it with a new account. They'll go through and be like, I want to start completely fresh. So
mm,
create a new account, even though I have another one. So that's kind of where you get some of these, big numbers from is people will do that. They'll use multiple dating apps at the same time. See, it's not as the same as like a social network in the traditional sense of I'm just going where whichever has the biggest network effects. You care about
mm,
that, but we're finding people care probably even more about finding the right type of person for them, the right type of group and community. So that's what matters more than just pure network effects of a general dating app.
mm. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so let's move on a little bit further from
Hmm.
where you are. So you launched that Canvas app, you got millions of users over there. Was that the point where you launched your specific either web or iOS or Android app? And how did you grew from 1 million to 100 million? That's the story I want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 3 months in 2013, we launched the iOS app and then pretty quickly the Android app. We were above Tinder. So we
Oh.
were getting downloads like sky high. And unfortunately, some of that attention created a problem for us where
Mm,
Apple decided they didn't want one of the top apps on the App Store to be something called Bang with Friends in the website world, and on the App Store abbreviated BWF.
mm,
So we got kicked off the App Store and had to go into crisis mode and try to get back on. But we got through that. We got through getting sued for our name. We rebranded to Down. We opened up to say, hey, this is a casual dating app for anybody to find what feels right for them in the nearby vicinity. And then we just kept growing and evolving. And so I hit upon this one spark of growth, which was I woke up one day and I looked at our download charts and I noticed a spike. I think it was in Brazil. And it was like, I didn't do any press or marketing that I know of there. So why is it going up? And it turns out that we were ranking for a valuable keyword on the App Store search. And so
mm,
when I dug into that, I got into the big wide world of ASO, App Store optimization. And I realized that I have this entire world and this entire funnel that I could explore, that I could really tap into across all of my regions that I cared about and start to rank higher and higher for this traffic. And the way I explain it to founders, because a lot of people say, even now, like, Colin, is it really worth it to do App Store optimization? Should I spend time on it? Should I just do the basics? And I tell them, think about it like this. You are renting a storefront
mm,
and you are paying that 30% to Apple or Google because they take that of every purchase that goes through their system, right? So you're renting a storefront and you are throwing that money down the drain if you're not optimizing your storefront, how you look
mm.
and how you convert users there and the sort of keywords that get them come in and find you. So absolutely, it's still worth it. We do over 300,000 downloads per month, almost 4 million a year for Down just in the US alone.
Mm.
And almost all of that is from App Store optimization. So it's absolutely worth it. And you're throwing money down the drain if you're not doing it. Now, I'm not saying only do that, but it's one of the channels that you're already paying for. You might as well use it. That got us to about 6 million users. All that App Store optimization growth, the press growth, we did eventually build in a way for people to virally invite their friends and refer them to the app. So all of those efforts in the first few years, we got to 6 million users, sold the company in 2016 to a Singaporean company. And as
Mm.
part of that one, I ran their labs division and I just started to apply all these growth techniques to lots of other apps. For one app I helped the team grow it from $0 in revenue and a decent start, but not a huge amount of downloads to top in their market.
Mm.
And when I left the company a few years later, they were making $4 to $5 million from that zero. So a really quick success on the back of stuff like these lessons, the infusing psychology, understanding your users, and using that for every channel that you're playing in. The 100 million though, this came from a merger. We
Mm.
merged with a live streaming app, and it at the time was just in Taiwan. It was live streaming is like interactive video. It's kind of like Twitch, right? So at the time, what we were doing was just focusing on that one market, and they were growing somewhat organically, but mostly, frankly, through paid ads and stuff like that.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so I came in and I said, one, I took over their marketing team and created a growth team. And we did lots of experiments on the marketing side and then on the product side. And so one of those experiments was actually, how do we get people to understand the value of interactive video, live stream video with a content creator on the other side and
Mm.
the viewer who is used to passive video consumption, right? I'm just watching a video and I'm watching YouTube or whatever. How do we convert that user to actually see the value when it clicks for them and then they stick around and they want to share it to other friends? And so this is something I call the magic moment. And our growth team worked with the data team and the product team to design a few experiments. And what we found was there was a really key principle called the reciprocity principle, where if you give somebody something, they're more likely to want to return it in kind or even greater. And so we armed our content creators with a special free gift. They could poke the end viewer. And
Mm,
when the end viewer got that, they would be like, oh, Ash, poke. Hi, thanks for watching my stream. Then you
mm,
feel recognized as a viewer. You feel like you're part of the show. And even
mm,
better, that poke bestowed upon you a free gift to poke
mm,
them back. And so now you could
mm,
see what the gifting mechanic was, what it's like to actually kind of influence the show. And so
mm,
when at the moment you wanted, you would poke the streamer back and he or she would be like, "Oh, Ash, thank you so much for the gift. Awesome, awesome to hear from you." Right? They'd
mm,
acknowledge you, you're part of it. You could ask a question. So that was the magic moment that made viewers actually lean in. And that led to a massive increase in about 50% growth in both revenue and retention and referrals to other people. So that
mm.
stuff combined with all of these other growth experiments and app store optimization and better performance ads and all that stuff led us to grow to over 100 million users total.
Wow. Wow. And all the things which you have shared, they are spot on for trying, failing, retrying, failing, trying, and then success, right? Because you have to keep trying different methodologies, different techniques, different experiments with your team, with your
Mhm.
budget in order to get that viral effect. And that's what it proves. So Goin, you are a psychologist, in my opinion. You understand how people think, and that's what your leverage is. You are a fantastic founder, and you have an entrepreneurial spirit. But I think more than these two, your superpower is understanding how people think and then reflecting on their thought process to gain their attention. So let's trigger that. Imagine you are back you are a 21 year old Colin. You want to start a dating app or a software which caters to the dating world. What would you do differently in 2026 to gain the same expansion within the similar kind of time frame, and what would be the strategies you would put in for that goal?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I wrote a book. It's coming out. It's already out now. But one of the reasons I wrote it was for the young Collins and Colleens, I like to say, who they are in that same spot. They're
Mm,
in the 22-year-old sort of mentality of, hey, I want to launch something. I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to have the best path to success. And so I thought about this a lot. One thing I would do differently is, especially for dating apps, but for products in general, the way we launched Bang with Friends and it took off, it was super exciting and super viral, just all the elements we talked about. But I wish I would have built in an element of exclusivity and scarcity into it because we didn't create much FOMO. And I talk about in the book how there are basically four elements of FOMO. So fear of missing out, it has urgency, it has social proof, it has exclusivity, and it has scarcity. And those four elements, when you have some or all of them mixing together, it creates this cycle of really fueling some growth. And it has a very nice side benefit of
mm,
allowing you to scale more deliberatively versus the instant worldwide growth that we hit with Bang with Friends. And that's so important for a dating app, especially, but even for other apps, it's really important because, you want that localized presence, but you really want to focus on how do you get the best experience for your first 100 users? How do you scale that to your first 1,000 and just keep moving up exponentially? But we didn't do that. And our first product was exciting and it was viral, but it was not a great user experience overall. And so we definitely hit the trial of despair as a startup, I would say, a lot sooner than we would have. And we didn't
mm,
have as solid of a foundation in terms of satisfying our users as I wanted to. And that's one of the big lessons. One of the things I would do now is, build in that exclusivity and scarcity, probably by wait lists in locations that I did, I wasn't ready to serve yet. We didn't have enough users. Allow that worldwide attention to fuel this FOMO and
mm,
then unlock places, cities, whatever, as we go in a very strategic way that allowed us to scale a little slower, of course, in terms of actual user numbers, but really create a better user experience and something that is has a better foundation. So
Mm,
that's a key thing I would do, and that comes from the benefit of hindsight. I learned how do you create FOMO. I've looked. I have a confession, to be honest. I still look at apps and products that go viral, and I
mm,
get jealous. I'm like, how did they do that? What
mm.
magic are they using, right? And so what I realized is they're not using magic. They just are tapping into a piece of psychology, a piece of how we think to get people to want to join, to want to share it, to want to keep coming back. And so what we do there is we try to break down what is that element. Like Clubhouse, if you remember them from the COVID era,
Yeah.
I break down their FOMO cycle. Like, what is that
Mm.
cycle that created such a good traction for them? And hopefully, readers of my book can understand from that how they can start to apply these elements to their own startups.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I'm gonna pick your brains later on for some of the ideas. But yeah, that is fantastic for our listeners because this is the strategy they can implement for any kind of apps they're building or softwares or any kind of product they're building.
Mhm.
Understand all these elements which you have mentioned and then figure out the parts of the FOMOs and all the other elements to sort of like go viral. And then obviously fantastic way to get picked up by the press if that is applicable to your niche, right?
Mhm.
Great stuff. So Colin, before we go into our lightning round, I wanted to ask you something. Throughout your experience, you must have had some bad experiences or some kind of setbacks, right? Because I'm sure when you grow
Yeah.
things, when you hire people, when you partner with other people, when you take investors' money, which is, we all know, super expensive early stages, would you be able to share one of those experiences which you think was sort of like a lesson learned for you? And it's something which you always be careful about in your future endeavors.
Wow. We've had so many fires and trials by fire, so many crises. It's hard to choose just one. But the first one that comes to mind, pretty early on, I found myself just completely overwhelmed and burnt out.
Mm,
I started the company in the Silicon Valley area and then I moved it to San Francisco. And a few months in, I found myself crying in the shower. I was just sitting there at the bottom, overwhelmed, burnout. I had two different crises going on. One, we got kicked off the App Store, as I mentioned,
mm,
and that was a big deal. Had very quickly become our top channel for users and how we stayed relevant. Two, we got sued for trademark infringement for our name, which didn't agree with,
mm.
but as a tiny startup with limited funding, you're going up against somebody who brings in 12 lawyers to every meeting. So it's
Yeah.
intimidating and it's your first time going through it. So those two plus all the, crazy work hours and all that stuff. It overwhelmed me. And I realized after I got through those that I had a lot more resilience than I had given myself credit for. I could navigate and survive through those moments that were truly testing me, that were truly challenging me to come up with other paths around these big obstacles. And I learned, for instance, that what seems really bad in the moment, but when you process it, talk to trusted advisors, and then sleep on it, it gets a little better each day. And so a little easier to wrap your head around, a little clearer which path you should take. Whenever I have something super challenging or a big decision to make, I definitely sleep on it. Stuff with platform risk and platform partners like Apple and Google, because we're an app. I learned in our team, we need multiple levels of checks and balances on our marketing team, on product, et cetera. People who are watching and have a mental record to maybe raise a flag if we think we're going maybe across some red line they might have, or just read the tea leaves because your platform partners like them are not always clear on what the rules are and how they're going to, decide things. We started to look for that platform risk as well. And I would widen that up to other founders as well. If you're relying on a platform like a payment processor or uh, Shopify, if you have an e-commerce site, et cetera. Those are different forms of platform risk that if I were running that business or advising them, I would be looking into how can we, one, make sure that we're playing by the rules, and two, look for ways to diversify
Mm.
outside of just that one platform.
Indeed, indeed. And I think this is a very crucial lesson because if your whole business is dependent upon just one medium, it could be App Store, it could be
Yeah.
Google Play Store, it could be Stripe for taking payment, right? And
Mhm.
suddenly they just cut you off. You can't do much about it. So instead, just pre plan for everything since from the beginning and then keep diversifying different routes for the product. Great. So, Colin, we've got six quick fire question for you. At any instance, if you do not want to answer any of them, just give me a skip
Mhm.
and then we can move to the next one. Is that okay?
Awesome. Let's do it.
Great. What are the top three strategies to generate more eyeballs for your product in 2026?
Yeah. So the first is think about your hooks. So what are you doing to hook curiosity, to open a loop? So open this thought loop so that people naturally want to close it. The second is use contrast. So the contrast effect, whatever channel, whatever method people are coming to discover you on that surface, on that channel, you want to look at how you can stand out from the other results, other people, other companies that are showing up there. And the third would be probably be authentic. So I walk up through in my book. The key part is you're not chasing competitors, you're not copying what they're doing. You need to plug into what are you, who are you as a company, and how you can stay true to that with all of your branding, all of your product, all of your presence. Because when you do, especially in this AI driven era, authenticity and having something that feels real, that feels like it's not just created purely by AI and going with the wind all the time is actually a differentiator.
Interesting. I think I love all three of them, especially the being authentic one, because I think that is so important right now with AI and all the AI
Yeah.
slop that it is a big differentiator. So thanks for that. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
So one of my favorite authors in the entrepreneurship space is Nir Ayel. Nir
Mm,
has written a few bestsellers. Hooked is probably my favorite. And that one, I read it when it first came out and I read it again since. I really think it helped to open my mind toward the behavioral science and the basically just the psychology behind what makes a product sticky, helps to design your product and your marketing. And I was lucky enough, it was one of those moments of like getting connected with one of your heroes. I reached out to Nir for my book and I asked him if he'd consider reading it and endorsing it. And to my
mm,
surprise, he was super accessible and awesome. He did endorse it, and now we chat every once in a while over email and share tips. So I'm reading his newest book, but yeah, I would go with Hooked by Nir Ayel,
mm.
and hopefully that gives you a good primer for this stuff.
Perfect. I'm gonna add that into my reading list now. Next one is going to be hooked. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
I'm gonna go with something that kind of bucks the trend and is different than the typical successful startup founder that we see in the headlines and causing problems all over the world sometimes. So I'm gonna go with empathy. So they're
Mm,
empathetic and they use that as a superpower to better understand their customers, their employees, their investors if they have them, to understand who they're reaching. Because when I see that, that tells me that they are building something sustainable that is going to last a while, that is worth being a part of, rather than just leveraging some sort of house of cards or pyramid scheme.
mm. Indeed, indeed. Empathy goes a long way, definitely. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Okay. Yeah. So I do a few different things. You know what? Every day I try to do a three-part exercise after I meditate usually, but it's basically gratefulness. So this keeps me grounded and positive. Observations. This is a way for me to just jot down any ideas or observations I have, some thoughts, and then my to-do list. So what are the top three things that if I get them done today, it was a productive day, it was a good day of progress. So I do this GOT, I call it this process to just stay focused on the positivity, getting ideas recorded, and then my top to dos instead of an exhaustive list of everything that I need to get done that everybody else wants to need to get done, and you know, or sends me emails. Other people sending you emails is usually them just giving you a to-do list. So I try to
Yeah.
stay focused on my own.
Yeah, that's so true. Because if you don't create your priority, somebody else will create yours. So,
Exactly.
what's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
Wow. I think there's actually a kind of a worldwide crisis going on right now, of especially men are finding that with the world changing, there's a lot of negative stuff going on frankly, in the toxic manosphere. And I don't want to get too political, but I would love to try to tackle that along with, I think it overlaps very strongly with this loneliness epidemic and crisis that people of all genders are feeling. And I think it's a big, bold problem to tackle, both of them. And there's something there on trying to bring people along so that they can improve themselves, they can be better community members, better partners. And we're trying to do some of it through our casual dating app, but I think there's another element to that as well.
Great stuff. What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Interesting and fun fact. Yeah, so I'm actually, despite this interview, hopefully it's come across all right, but I think we have this idea of like the smartest people in the room are just like so quick-witted, quick on their feet, and they come across as like knowing everything. And as I've realized in the past few years, I'm actually not super quick on my feet. I like to sit with things and think more deeply on them and process them more and then come back with it. So maybe it's not a super interesting or fun fact, but I think you can still be intelligent and all that stuff without being the fastest one in the room with an idea or, gung ho about everything. You can be that sort of like more considerate and calmer presence and still be a good entrepreneur.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the more and more we are growing, and the more and more we are surrounded by attention grabbing gadgets all the time.
Hmm.
I think the personality is getting more valuable. The more personality you have, the more you think before you answer. It just showcases that you give importance to the people you are talking. Great. Well, Colin, thank you
Love it.
so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking the last years of building this business and the previous one, and some of the ups and downs. If people want to get in touch with you, if they have any questions, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, you can search for me anywhere, or you can go to my website, colinhodge.com. And there you'll find info about my book, Outrageous Startup Growth. It's a top seller on Amazon's entrepreneurship category right now. And I think you're going to find a lot of insights and tips. And it just makes this stuff a lot more accessible and understandable to apply to your own startups rather than the typical boring business book. So check it out on Kindle or hard copy and let me know your feedback.
Perfect. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thank you very much, Ash. Nice to be here.